We are joined by none other than Lin McCraw, owner of the McCraw Law Group, joining us to discuss Ohio residents being hit by waves of sickness from this train derailment. Lin, thank you for coming on tonight. We really appreciate your time.
Well, thank you for having me, Stacy.
Yes, I am so glad you're here. Let's first off, the plume that I saw in the images and the videos, it looks like something out of a disaster film, only it's real. I've never seen anything so apocalyptic that was actually in real life, that wasn't made up in Hollywood.
Yeah, isn't that crazy? I mean, I understand that the plume went up 3,000 feet, and of course it scattered remnants and chemicals over an enormous area in parts of Ohio and in parts of Pennsylvania.
So let's talk about the dead fish, dead animals, and now people being hit by a wave of sickness. This is not something they can actually contain.
Well, they're trying to contain it. They're doing their best, but anytime you have the sheer magnitude of release that we're talking about here, I mean, you've got to understand there were 50 cars that were derailed off the train track. Now, obviously, not all 50 of them were breached, but there were a number of them that were breached with everything from, oils to vinyl chlorine gas in them, and that vinyl chlorine gas is one of the things that they were really concerned about that they did the release of. I think we're going to find in coming days, though, that there are other chemicals that we don't even know about yet. We do have at the EPA's website, they do have a list of chemicals that were supposed to be on those in those individual train cars, but we're going to find out more as time goes.
So I saw a video by a chemical engineering student, and he was talking about the different volatilities of the different chemicals that were present on the plane or on the train, and the derailment. You know, once those chemicals are exposed to the air, then the activities that they naturally progress through, it's not something that, you can kind of change. It's like, oh, it's been exposed to the air, or, oh, it's at this temperature, and it's going to behave in a certain way because of those varying factors. So what is the chance that they're going to be able to prevent this, well, the smoke plume and also the results of the spill from traveling all the way down the Ohio River?
Well, they're not going to be able to prevent it from traveling down the Ohio River. I understand that there are plans in place right now to monitor it as it goes down the Ohio River. It will over time and over distance and with additional water, it will eventually tend to peter out to a much lesser extent. But the problem you've got to understand is that, some of these especially some of these oils and that sort of thing, they've got additives in there, and some of them are forever chemicals. So even humans that are exposed to even small amounts of those can be very significant for the people that are encountering them. I would, if I was in anywhere up and down the Ohio River downstream from where this occurred, I would make absolutely sure that I was drinking, water out of buying the water, and make sure that I distanced myself the best I possibly could. And I would make sure immediately and go ahead and get a really good physical together with good blood work. In the event in the future we see cancer clusters and that sort of thing, it's going to be critical for your lawyers to be able to show that you were not sick before. So getting a good physical now is very important if you're exposed.
Wow, so that's something I don't think, us regular lay folk would even think about doing without your expertise here tonight to share that. And that is good advice. Blood work, sometimes it can be a little pricey, especially if you haven't met your deductible, but in this case, it's totally worth it to have that benchmark. And so you're talking about anyone who lives downstream of what part, like specifically, what region of the country?
Anywhere that goes down the watershed from East Palestine, you're going to want to at least, at some distance it becomes negligible, right? But we don't know right now if that distance is 10 miles, 20 miles, or 50 miles. We don't know that yet. We will learn that in the coming days. In addition, understand that with that, when you saw that big plume that went up in the air, anywhere that air carried, and my understanding is that it went away from East Palestine, but you know, over the Pennsylvania border for several miles, any of that area that you would be well served to go ahead and get a baseline. Any area in which they have animals that are coming up dead or big fish kills or anything like that that you're seeing in any of your waters, absolutely. You know, fish and frogs and that sort of thing, those are harbingers. They are literally canaries in the coal mine when you have a natural disaster like this, to make sure that, you know, to tell us that, hey, there's something going on here, there's an exposure going on here that we need to be really worried about.
All right, so that's good advice. Now let's talk a little bit about how this could possibly mimic nuclear winter, per former Fire Chief Silverio Caggiano.
Yes, I saw his interview, and what he's talking about was the cacophony of different chemicals, and we don't know how they're all going to react with each other. As you said earlier in your introduction, anytime that you expose some of these chemicals, especially the volatile chemicals, to air and to water, chemical reactions are going to occur. And sometimes, you know, you're going to take liquids and you're going to make them gas sometimes, and sometimes the gases are going to get more volatile and they're going to be more dangerous. Like the you know, the vinyl chloride it'll make chloride gas, and I mean, you know, it's just I mean, essentially that's the same chemical that they used in World War I in gassing people. So I mean, it is a you know, the gassing the armies whenever they were fighting each other. So understand that since we don't know all of the chemicals, we can't possibly know what all the chemicals reactions will be at this time. We just know that it's bad, and that's what he was referring to by nuclear winter, because we can't really anticipate what all the effects are going to be. We know what some effects are going to be of some of the more major chemicals, but again, the minor chemicals that are there, the forever chemicals that are additives and that sort of thing, we don't even know what they are, much less how they're going to react whenever they interact with each other and interact with the atmosphere.
Wow. All right. So we're talking about East Palestine, and this is in Ohio. Everyone's talking about the town now, and you know, we're seeing articles pop up. What's going on in Palestine, Ohio? And you know, what's so people are saying, you know, the name over and over and over again, but most of us don't know anything about this little town. It's a tiny place. It's not some place that we would normally be discussing in news stories. That's
right. It is a small place, but you got to understand that when you have these train derailments, they very often happen in small places. I'm from Texas myself, and you know, in parts of Texas, we have areas that are high, you know, big areas for doing a lot of refining work and that sort of thing down around Houston, and we have derailments down there occasionally, and you know, they get bad, but not like East Palestine, because in these small rural communities, they're simply not prepared to handle spills like this. A lot of their local officials don't you know, they practice all types of different scenarios. They may practice for a tornado or something along those lines, but something like this can devastate the entire community. It's my understanding that the EPA is already, you know, placing, you know, hundreds of sites to go through people's homes to check them to make sure that they have safe levels in the air right now and that sort of thing. Even with all of that occurring, like I said, we don't know what's going to get in their water system. We don't know what's going to get in the soils. My understanding is the EPA has already designated this as a Superfund cleanup site, which you know, that's if you think of dioxin in the 90s, and you know, some of the mining areas will have entire areas that are completely off limits. You can't do anything there because they're considered a Superfund cleanup site. And they're just that dangerous. They're that dangerous to people. Well, the EPA is already considering this particular community to be one of those Superfund cleanup sites, to my knowledge.
Well, like 10 years ago, I would have said, "Oh, that's good," but we have Superfund cleanup sites right here in Missouri that are in, like, you know, within the boundaries of the suburban areas, like where you find thousands of homes, single-family dwellings, apartments, and everything else like that. And there are Superfund cleanup sites there, and they have not been cleaned up It just designating it as Superfund cleanup site doesn't mean that they're going to come clean it up.
That's right. All it really does is it establishes some liability on the owners and occupiers of the land, and they're supposed to be working with the government to develop plans for cleanup. I have seen where the railroad has designated at least some initial cleanup options on the EPA's website, but that's obviously going to be in flux until we know exactly how bad these spills are, how much of this material got out, how toxic it is to the air, and how toxic it is to the water.
So let's talk a little bit about this lawsuit. Insider.com is reporting that residents are filing a class action lawsuit against the train company that owns the freight train that was derailed. Do we have any idea what happened here? Because the image it's apocalyptic of this derailment. All of the cars on their side, and why they were carrying all of these chemicals, all these different variations of chemicals on one train instead of maybe sending them. Like maybe we just don't know enough about how these things traverse the country.
Well, it is honestly quite normal for it to traverse the country just the way that it did, in massive long trains. I mean, here, I think there was like 150-ish cars on the train, and 50 of them derailed. That's the issue. It looks it truly is apocalyptic. It absolutely is when you have a derailment like this. But what's going to happen legally is that they're going to do a root cause analysis. Experts are going to be crawling all over the scene as soon as they can safely get in there to try to figure out what all were the causes. And in law, they'll call it the proximate cause, but what all caused this train to derail. Most of the time, when you get in and do a root cause analysis, what we find is we normally have, in situations like this, some type of a maintenance issue. Either a train wasn't maintained properly, the tracks weren't maintained properly. That's a normal thing to find. You've got to know, anytime you have a train, you've got all these parts that are moving and that wear out, and they're going to wear out over time. So you should have a regularly scheduled maintenance schedule in which you not only look at the equipment, but that you regularly replace the equipment to prevent things occurring just like this, these catastrophic failures that sometimes you may not see until something gets worn so thin that it eventually breaks, right? So these things very often can be anticipated, and usually when we get in and we do the root cause analysis, we realize, my goodness, this should have been anticipated. This was years overdue sometimes. We see that. The other thing that we may see, and I certainly know that they will be looking at, is to see if you had something that, if the maintenance was fine, if there wasn't an issue there, then they're going to look at the other reasons for the failures, right? Did you have a product defect? Was the product not manufactured to standards? And if it wasn't manufactured to standards, whoever manufactured that product is going to have a big headache on their hands. It's going to be a situation in which I anticipate that the railroad is, they're absolutely going to be at risk. But there are other potential defendants here, not just the railroad. Anybody that's responsible for maintaining the railroad, anybody that's responsible for maintaining the railroad cars, they all, especially if that activity was outsourced, they are all potentially going to be defendants in these cases until we figure out, who all the most responsible people are.
Wow, so that's a lot to think about. They're going to really, really look at every part of this, not just maybe the guy who was running the train, or the employees who prepared the trains or the chemicals, but literally the tracks themselves. So they're going to come out with, I guess, an analysis of what caused this. There have been reports of other derailments. I don't know if you saw those reports. I'm not sure if they're actually true, because I think the main thing here is everyone's looking at Palestine, Ohio, and trying to figure out, if things are safe, if people are safe there. Is there a likelihood that we're going to have more train derailments? I saw people talking about that online, and I felt like they were going a little too far, but it's a good question for me to ask you.
Well, the answer is going to be it just depends upon the lines and depends upon the trains, depends upon how well they have been maintained, if it's a maintenance issue. Again, we don't want to jump the gun and say that it is a maintenance issue. I think that the odds are pretty good that it might be. But you could have simple human error. You could have a person that was driving the train too fast or something along those lines. But even then, most of the time, the train companies will have, they're just like, trucking companies and that sort of thing. If they have employees that are routinely taking dangerous activities and actions, they're normally going to know who they are, and those are normally the ones that unfortunately get into these kind of catastrophic failures that can, maim and kill. So, I mean, we've been very fortunate in this case so far that we did not have just a whole lot of loss of life initially. My fear, though, is that going forward, we're going to see some loss of life from this, just from the cancers and autoimmune diseases and neurological diseases that are sure to come from the exposure to some of these chemicals.
And that is the part that I think people are just terrified about, because all of the areas that were evacuated, you still have downstream of those, people are talking about after effects. They're talking about, that they smell chemicals, that they're in the danger zone still, even though they weren't ordered to evacuate.
Yeah, absolutely. And the governmental units, they run a fine line. They want to make sure they evacuate people that are in danger, but they don't want to panic everybody else. Sometimes they err on the side of not being careful enough, and sometimes they err on the side, that you look at it and say, well, that's overkill, right? And the thing here is getting it right. I think in situations like this, it's better to have a little bit of overkill and save people from potentially devastating exposure. You remember when the Twin Towers fell, we had people that were sick and dying for years from exposure to the asbestos and everything else in those buildings as it came, crashing down. All of the folks in New York that were on the streets and stuff were exposed to these, it's the same sort of thing. They're exposed to a bunch of chemical agents that were all mixed together in the air, and as a result, there were literally thousands of people that whose lives have been altered terribly. That even survived the initial impact.
I got to say, that to me, at the time, I remember them saying, people are getting sick from breathing in the fumes and the dust. And I thought to myself, I wonder how bad that will get. And it really did get bad. I mean, there were people who had cancer, people who died within years of the towers coming down who were perfectly healthy. And it was because they, had that white dust all over them, and they were exposed to it for a significant amount of time during the evacuation. Yeah.
Absolutely. And I for one was very proud of. I was a member of American Association of Justice, AAJ, and they had set up a task force, a strike force for lawyers to help people that were involved, that were sickened by the in the 9/11 attacks, and it was just a wonderfully cool thing to see these lawyers coming together and no charge or anything and helping these people to the degree that we possibly could. Now of course there was at least a pot of money we could go to get for these individuals that were sick and injured and dying, but I saw myself some wonderful stories of what people were able to do to help survivors, to help their families whenever they got sick from that type of exposure. In this particular case, I'm not sure if they're going to be looking at a mass tort or just an individual tort. I suspect what's going to happen is that at some point it will probably all get drugged together in a mass, all the individual cases will get drugged together in a mass action. There's going to be limited insurance, but we will know, as time goes, we're going to have to find out, first of all, who all is potentially responsible, what type of insurance coverages there are, how strong the liability case is against each individual defendant that's responsible. And I suspect that eventually we'll probably be looking at everything getting pulled together in some type of a mass situation.
Oh, it's such a tragedy. Our hearts and prayers are up. Prayers are up and hearts are going out to the people who are impacted by this. In any case, if you're listening from Ohio and you're anywhere near the Ohio River or downstream, anywhere in Palestine, really go get that blood work done. And also evacuating, even though you might not be under an evacuation order, is probably advisable. Just better safe than sorry if you can. It's been such a pleasure to have you here. Thank you for coming on with your expertise. Many parts of this that we couldn't possibly have touched on as non-legal minds you brought to us and explained so well. Thank you, Lin McCraw. Thank you for your time.
Well, thank you for having me. I appreciate it, Stacy.